We are talking to Rick Osman about ancient America and the fortified structures there and his book. So, Rick, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you. When we left off, I believe we were talking about King Arthur.
Sure.
And his having been killed in North America. And again, this is Alan Wilson, Baron Blackett's interpretation of chronicles that still exist in Wales, and in the original script as it existed in Wales in that time period, which is roughly 570 AD.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was also described, in 48 BC by Julius Caesar. So anyway, they had their own script, and it was distinct from any of the other scripts. Caesar, who was very adept, did not know this script. At any rate, you find this script along the Ohio Valley in a couple of different places. And the local legends have been that Prince Madoc founded his colony there. And that fortress at Devil's Backbone was a big part of it. Well, interestingly enough, archaeologically, there may be some agreement even amongst some of the now past archaeologists. If you go back to the early 20th century, the archaeologists were saying, these graves that we find here that we call slab-sided graves, that we call stone box graves, are similar in construction, like identical, and contemporary to what is called a slab-sided grave in Wales. And there were reports of finding bodies.
I'm glad you brought this
armor.
up. Sorry, Rick. I'm glad you brought this up because this is one of the things that I've been aware of, and I think this is fascinating, Rick. This Welsh connection to ancient America.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and of course, it was dismissed pretty much out of hand by anybody who didn't live near Louisville, and by one lady at Mobile, Alabama, where they say that Prince Madoc came ashore. And she was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and she garnered support, and they put up a plaque there on Mobile Bay, commemorating that spot as where Prince Madoc and however many colonists entered North America. Well, here a few years ago, that plaque was dismantled and went into storage because the historians did not agree. Well, interestingly enough, when the French were there in 1702, and by the way, that is where they established the original capital of La Louisiane, was at Mobile. They initially came in to a place that they called Massacre Island, because it was like hip deep in human bones over this huge area, several acres.
Sure.
And they subsequently moved the capital further upriver into the bay because of hurricanes and whatnot. But while there, they recorded an event where the younger brother of the governor had coerced, basically, one of the local Mobile Indians to take him out to a place that's called, on that map, that 1716 Delisle map, it's still called the Isle of Statues. And D'Iberville recorded that there were 5 statues on this mound, and that it was a man, a woman, a baby, an owl, and a bear. And he did not believe that they could possibly have been made by the local talent. And he was going to send them back to France. Well, there's no record of them ever getting to France or existing anywhere at this point in time. But they were yellowish in color, so they were kind of golden, so the golden bear. And if they went ashore there, then fought their way up the riverways, they would have ended up someplace in around Louisville as their final point. And the native traditions support that. But in between there, 2 years or so after they got ashore is when Arthur was killed. So, however long it took him to get to that point at Louisville, Kentucky, or actually in Indiana across from Louisville, we don't know for sure, but Wilson thinks the whole period was about 4 years. And that halfway in between there, when Arthur was killed, his body was put into a cave, and this is what they interpret from the Colburn script Chronicles of Wales, that the body was sewn into 2 deer skins and placed in a cave to desiccate or dry or mummify, and that at the end of the 2 years, they started to bring him home because he was still the ruling king of Wales. His son was still in Wales. And anyway, they finally got the body back, but the son would not be of age for 2 more years, and they didn't trust the regent. So they said, oh, well, he's still in America. And they hid the body in another cave in Wales. Well, in Stoke Dry, you know where Stoke Dry is in England?
Stoke Dry, is this the mural in the church?
It is the mural at the Stoke Dry Church. That's correct. Dated at 1000 AD. Give or take. And what does it depict? Well, it depicts a king with a fleur-de-lis in the background, tied to a tree or a cross or something, and 2 individuals shooting arrows into him. And although part of it's been destroyed, you can pretty well tell that it's about 20 arrows.
Wow.
And the figure to the left of the king shooting arrows into him has a large feathered headdress and a loincloth. And the figure to the right of him has a small feather headdress and a loincloth. And yet the historians say, oh, well, that depicts the martyrdom of King Edmund on December the 25th, whatever year that was, around 1000 AD. And he was martyred by the Danes, invading on Christmas Day wearing loincloths. Yeah, right. Even the Danes aren't that crazy.
Sure.
So I contend
hi everybody, you're very welcome.
Of Native Americans shooting arrows into King Arthur II, and that Alan Wilson has that part right. Anyway,
wow.
Even 10,000 Welsh colonists, though, virtually starving when they left, and then fighting their way through a continent full of hostile Native Americans, probably could not build all these fortresses because they just didn't have the resources. But they could use them, and they probably used the ones that they had a foreknowledge of, because otherwise they wouldn't have just navigated directly to them, which they apparently did. So apparently they had a record of some kind that said, okay, these rivers lead to these fortresses and these resources, particularly copper, which we'll come back to. So that knowledge preexisted that 570 AD time frame in Wales. It was in Wales, otherwise they would not have had access to it. Or it could have been in Ireland, too, because this was contemporary to this guy named St. Brendan the Navigator.
Yes. What a fascinating individual.
Yeah.
And Scott Walter did a piece on him on America Unearthed, History Channel 2 show.
Yep.
Yeah.
And another interesting factoid, if you go to the chapel at the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, one of the stained glass windows of that chapel certainly seems to me to depict a leather boat and monk-like figures sailing the Atlantic.
Wow.
So does the U.S. Naval Academy know something the rest of us don't?
I think so. Rick. Undoubtedly.
I think they may. But St. Brendan, who died, to the best of my recollection, and I don't have that in front of me, in 592, would have sailed some 30 years earlier, according to history. So that would have been roughly contemporary to when St. Matic was blown out to sea for that extraterrestrial impact event.
Sure.
So they could have crossed paths, you know.
Sure. Rick, let's bring in the copper, because I like I say, I'm Mr. Scientist, and I know you're from a science background, and you probably appreciate this as much as I do, but I mean, the amount of copper that was mined in the Great Lakes region, my geography's not that great, but up around that region, it didn't go into the Native American culture. It
Certainly not all of it.
Not all of it. Some of
a lot of it did, yeah. What's called the old copper culture made tens of thousands of artifacts of copper.
But when you add it up, Rick, it doesn't quantify the bits that were quarried out of the ground. There's so much missing.
No, you're still talking tens of thousands of pounds of artifacts. Yeah. But when you look at the amount of copper, then you're talking millions of pounds.
Yeah, we're talking like I think on Scott's show they call it the Great Copper Heist, because it's missing. Nobody knows who took it. Like, you know, it's a mystery. But we have an inkling that you're going to tell us. We have an inkling of where it maybe went. Like,
well, yeah, I think that, and I'm certainly not alone in this part, that there was enough copper mined from the Lake Superior region, that would be mostly upper Michigan, Wisconsin, a little bit into Minnesota, and certainly Isle Royal, to fuel the Bronze Age of the Old World. And we have archaeologically found evidence of smelting bronze, brass, and a few other alloys in the Americas, in Mayan and Incan and Aztec times. We've also found a tiny head off a figurine in Mexico that was excavated archaeologically that dates to about 200 AD, and it was found under the floor of a 14th century Aztec house.
Wow. Wow.
But it's definitely of Roman origin.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So the Ninth Roman Legion, who disappeared from history in 117 AD, and whose one singular officer shows up as a very important person in Roman history in 142 AD, may have had that mission, much like Hadrian's Wall controlled trade between, you know, Great Britain and Scotland, mm-hmm. And Petra controlled trade in Petra. Well, the rivers would have been the only trade routes in North America.
Right.
And all these fortresses that dotted all these rivers would have been placed, and are indeed placed, to control traffic on those rivers. And in a few cases, both river traffic as well as cross-country traffic, where that converged. One of those is in Pennsylvania.
These were the highways of the day, Rick, weren't they? These waterways, and certainly right. The Mississippi, man, this river's massive, isn't it? It's like...
It is, and it goes almost to copper country, yeah. But not quite.
Almost.
You would have to ford somewhere, or somehow get across land to continue the journey. And there has been a lot of speculation, of course, in Minnesota, that Vikings, I don't like the word Vikings, they were Norse, certainly, but... Norse,
yeah, that's a better term, isn't it?
That they were there, including the Kensington Runestone, which is how Scott Wolter got involved in all this in the first place. But the evidence is pretty strong. It's just not conclusive of when, where, how long, how much, etc.
I think just for the audience, I mean, there's a very high grade of pure copper found in this region. And because it's such a high grade, I don't think there's anywhere else on Earth that we know of yet that has such a high grade. It's like 99%, is it not?
Yes. In upper Michigan,
yeah,
what they call the Keweenaw Peninsula, when they were mining it actively from the 1850s up until, well, 1950s,
yeah,
it was considered the purest copper on the planet. And it was, like you said, up to 99.95% pure copper.
Wow. Which is unusual. That's highly unusual in terms of metallurgy. To get
right, it is. Even more so. The trace elements, you know, I guess you'd say, the inconsistencies, the trash that was within the copper, was almost always silver.
Wow.
which made it an interesting alloy.
Yeah, yeah. It was a prized possession. This whoever found that mineral ores wherever it was located, that was like a prized possession. They just must have went, oh my god! They were probably drooling, Rick, with excitement.
And some of the evidence of when the mining began in Michigan, in particular, is amazing because it is as much as 8,000 BC. That's pretty extreme, but it is in keeping with when the ice finally retreated. Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing about Keweenaw Peninsula is at that time, it was nearly covered with pure copper because it had been broken off by the glaciers and deposited there. You had giant boulders. In fact, one of them survives. It's about 28 ton of pure copper. Wow. All you got to do is break off a piece. And you can anneal it with charcoal, but you cannot smelt it with charcoal. So you've got at least 10,000 years of mining of pure copper, essentially. Wow. Now let's go back and look at when the Bronze Age started in the Old World. And it is, in essence, 3,800 BC, give or take. Mm-hmm. And yet there are copper implements in North America that go back 6,000, 7,000 years. Yeah. But we only know that by context because you cannot directly date copper. Take into account that a lot of the copper and bronze artifacts in particularly the Eastern Med from about 3,800 to 3,000 BC had small, very, very small deposits of silver in it. Mm-hmm. So all the archaeologists and metallurgists in the Old World were saying, I wonder why the ancients put silver in their bronze. And you got all the mining engineers in Upper Michigan saying, I wonder what happened to all this copper. Yeah. Millions of pounds of it.
A lot. There's a lot unaccounted for, Rick. An awful lot.
Right.
It's not a small amount. It's not a little bit of an anomaly. It's a major anomaly.
It is. And let's go to another part of the world. In Belize, you have Pumapunto, Yeah. I think it's in Belize.
No, Pumapunto is in Bolivia.
Bolivia, sorry, yes. High up in the air.
Yeah, I've been there on my second visit. I have been to Peru, and then I've been to Peru and Bolivia.
So you've got all these copper staples that hold those stones together.
They're called keystone cuts. They cut keystones into the masonry, and then they poured molten. They pulled nickel and copper in together. But there's no source of nickel there, Rick, is there?
There's no source of copper there that would count for that.
That grade of copper and the nickel either. Yeah, it's a
mystery.
But
what was there was tin, a lot of it.
Yeah.
So you had, and there are only two of those staples that survive, as far as I know.
Yeah, the rest are
been melted down, sold off as scrap or something. They're gone. But if we could get a sample of that and match it against the raw copper, float copper from Upper Michigan, then I think we might actually find a pretty close match.
Yeah.
But if they have Michigan copper in Bolivia, high up in the mountains, by the way, and probably just up the mountain from where the tin mines were, then you have all you need to make bronze. And yet there's not much bronze in the Americas. The other major source of tin in the entire world was in Cornwall.
Yes.
And it was known as the Tin Islands.
Now, Rick, you alluded during the break to a Google Earth something for the listeners. Can you please elaborate for that?
Sure. And it still relates back to King Arthur. But really quickly, King Arthur legend says he was conceived at Tintagel. And Tintagel exists today.
I've been there.
Remnants of the castle exist there today.
Yeah.
But if you look at it on Google Earth, you got this little island out there, and then you got the main village on the mainland, and From Google Earth at the right elevation, it looks like there's a woman's face there on the village side looking up at the island.
Really?
Check it out.
I'm going on to Google Earth right now. I love this stuff on Google Earth. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. I do a little bit of Google Earth research every now and again.
She's a homely woman, but
fascinating. The funny thing is, I've been to Tintagel on 3 occasions when I used to live there. But what a fascinating place, Cornwall.
Yeah, we'll come back to that one in the last half hour because
Sure.
it's an important piece of evidence.
Sure.
But the Romans inhabited Britain, not Great Britain, not England, Britain, or Brute, or Brit. And they did it from 43 AD to roughly 430 AD. But from 78 AD to 108, the Ninth Roman Legion was there building fortifications. Mm-hmm. They built the fort at York. They built a couple others. They built 2 forts at York. When Boadicea, I think was her name, local queen, kicked their ass in 78 AD, they fortified. Yeah. And they did it as a wood fortress.
She was a force to be reckoned with. Boadicea, we call her. Boadicea.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a force to be reckoned with. Boadicea took on the Romans. I mean, she was based in Colchester, and I've lived, the first place I've ever arrived in Britain was Colchester, and even today it's a very big army garrison for the British Army, and, it's like there's 10,000 British Army squadron standard there all the time. But it used to be the capital of Britain before Londinium. The Romans called London Londinium, and before Londinium they had Colchester. But she ruled Colchester, and when they landed there, they literally landing into a melting pot with Boadicea.
Yep.
But, she eventually fell, but I mean, a woman took on.
She didn't fall militarily. She fell to espionage.
Yeah, espionage, exactly. They couldn't beat her. I mean, this was a woman. A woman took on a woman took on the Roman army and
kicked its ass.
And kicked its ass, and they were a laughing stock. I mean, they were scared. They were scared. I wouldn't like to go against Boadicea. She was rough, man. She was the queen of all queens.
Yep. So they built these fortresses. They were good at it. They built 2 bridges across the Rhine River for Julius Caesar. They were, in effect, field engineers and soldiers. And they disappeared from history. So who might have built 45 or so fortresses across the Ohio Valley?
Yeah, you've got wonderful pictures in your book there, Rick, as well. And you know, I just look at them and I look at Roman. I've seen Roman fortifications in Britain when I lived there and other parts of the world, and you know, it's reminiscent of what you're talking about. Like, you know, it's bizarre that there's very few people pick on this stuff, Rick. There really is, you know. We're coming up to a break, Rick, anyway. But there's very few people pick up on this stuff. And yourself, Scott Walter, there's a very few handful of people that really want to tackle this question. Rick, I love what you do because you have a wealth of knowledge, and you only have to speak to you, Rick, until you start rolling out facts and figures and the information. I mean, anybody can start saying this in a book and then not know what they're talking about. You have the goods to back it up because there's so much more behind the book. You know, you know the information behind the information, Rick. And that's what I love about you, dude. It's really, really good, you know, and it's like, you know, I don't think there's enough attention on this, copper, heist that went on. There's not enough. I want to get into also some of these giants that are in America, if you want to talk about that. And the pygmies as well. I mean, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. We're only going backwards halfway at the moment. Like, I mean, but like there's the Egyptian connection to, you know, America as well, and maybe, I mean, I think every culture was there, Rick. I really do.
I agree.
I think everybody had a pot shot at America before Columbus.
People have been sailing for at least 120,000 years, and the archaeological record supports that.
For sure. Rick, we're just going to take a quick break there. We'll play a couple of tunes, and we'll be back in just a moment, and we're going to roll out some more fascinating information on ancient America. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio with your host James Swagger. We're talking with Rick Osman about ancient America and some very interesting, fascinating information. Welcome back, Rick.
Thank you. We are talking about ancient America, but that's really the ancient world because, in my opinion, and pretty much the basis of my book, people have been sailing for a very long time, and some of them knew where they were.
Yeah, I think ancient America was a colonial long before we said it was a colonial. It was a colony. It was a colonial empire. It may be a secret colonial empire to a known few group of people. I think.
Right.
I think,
yeah, and that's important because the Romans, in addition to conquering Great Britain, the Romans also conquered Carthage. But when the Romans conquered anything, what they went after, just like the example of Archimedes, was the knowledge. So Carthage, if they had any written history of any kind, and we know that they did, the Romans captured all that. That would have included all of the secret trade routes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the Carthaginians were like absolute beautiful seafarers. I mean, these guys.
Correct.
These guys did it for fun, Rick.
Well, yeah, and they had yacht races and such. But they also had a vast trading network. They had mines in Spain. They had fields throughout northern Africa and even into Spain and Britain. They had colonies everywhere.
Sure.
Syracuse, where Archimedes was one of their colonies.
As a matter of point, the Greeks used to call the people that were on the island of Britain, this is where the name Britain comes from, which most people don't realize, is that they call the British people the Prehistory, Pretannics, and the Prehistory basically meant painted people, which were to denominate the Braveheart type blue painted people that were taunting them to come onto the coast to fight them, they were war.
Yes.
But the Greeks were known as they called them the Pretannics, and that's what became the Britannics. But yeah, I mean, as far north as that, I like to think now, certainly in the light of evidence that you've brought, and a few handful of others, Rick, that it wasn't just as far as Britain. We accept that because it's all in Europe. It's
right.
We're in this domain of Europe over here. We have this mindset of Europe. We have our European Economic Union.
Yeah, you could almost never be out of sight of land and still sail to all the outlying areas.
Yeah, and where I'm at now in the northeast of Ireland, in Antrim, we can see Scotland on the clear day. The nearest crossing is 16 miles. And we can also see England across the French Channel, so it's you can always see land, as you say. Even the islands, the major islands, you can still see land.
Yeah, Isle of Man being an important one because it's a melting pot genetically.
Sure.
But the Brits, I should say that the Roman, in the case of the Ninth Legion, who were there for a long period of time, they became British. They might still wear the Roman uniform, but when they went any place to do anything, they talked to the natives in their Cymry language.
Yeah, that's what they did, though, isn't it, Rick? They incorporated the local languages. That's why they were so successful. They were a war machine, but they incorporated the local tribes. They incorporated that into the Roman war machine.
And into the civil life as well. If they picked up a political system that worked a little better because of one particular rule, they'd pick up that rule. If they picked up a religious system that kind of fit in, then they would very slowly try to introduce their own, but, for a long time it would be integrated. Oh, wait, that's going on yet today. At any rate, the entire Roman Ninth Legion would have spoken probably several different languages, would have used several different scripts, and they would have been very well traveled because they've been in North Africa to, the Near East, Macedonia, Gaul, Germanic. They tried to get into Ireland. It didn't work.
Yeah, I think they used to call Ireland Hibernia.
Yes.
And, it was a holiday.
But they weren't very good for them.
It was actually, they called, people refer to the Ireland Hibernia as a Roman holiday destination because they found some Roman coins, but it was like a holiday destination for them to get away from the barbaric tribes. I mean, they didn't try to conquer. They just came over here, had a look, and went home and traded.
Yes. And they did that in a lot of places, but it still isn't in the Roman histories that way, which brings to the point that not everything, the Romans were great historians.
They loved the history, didn't they?
But they didn't tell everything. Oh, wait, that goes on today too.
Yeah. Maybe they started it all, Rick. Maybe they started
well, no, I think they inherited that from one of their conquests. But the connections are just too great to completely ignore. I maintain that it's a plausible hypothesis that either the Carthaginians or the Romans built the fortresses along the Ohio Valley, and that the Welsh used them, and possibly several other different colonization efforts used them.
Isn't there writings of the bull there, the mythological worship of the bull in the caves there as well, that Scott Walter was talking about?
Yes, and it doesn't look like an American bison, really.
No, not at all.
Particularly in Kansas, there's a depiction not only of the bull, but also of Anubis, which, yeah, that one's pretty wild. I'm sorry, yeah, in Kansas. The Anubis Cave is what it's called. And Gloria Farley documented her study of it pretty well. She was pretty old at the time and somewhat decrepit, but she was still very willful to get that done. And she did it. So now it's a matter of study rather than a matter of disregard. So
yeah,
the idea that there was never any Old World writing in North America is, to put it in the Great British vernacular, bollocks.
Yeah, that's a load of poppycock is another one. But listen, Rick, here's the thing. I've often heard about Egyptian connections to, the desert Southwest, and we've got Celtic connections. We also have the Minoans maybe making it there.
And not just Minoans.
And Phoenicians as well. The Phoenicians as well, perhaps. And Phoenicians maybe made it to Brazil.
Right.
I mean, I think transoceanic contact between North America, South America, Central America, it was rife. They may have not had a major infiltration or a major network there. They may have just had little spots that they knew to go to.
That's how the French did it initially.
Yeah, I mean,
they just put up trading posts.
And both used ships, the boat weren't that, far away from each other in technology, were they? There was a technological acumen in ancient America. Or ancient world over here. Whether they brought the ancient world to North America, South America, Central America, there was a technological acumen embodied there, and we have remnants of that.
Yes, and a lot of it goes back to the copper and the other resources, because even in Ireland you have what's called the Bell Beaker culture, or Bell Beaker people.
Sure.
And they were quite tall, they were red-headed, and they dealt in copper in the last half of their era.
Wow. Yeah.
And in fact, there is one that I know of, artifact, that was found in Ireland that was assayed, and the conclusion was that it was Michigan copper.
Wow, fascinating. Do you think that these guys were the red-haired giants of America?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
Let's talk about that, Rick. I want you to bring that in, because we're going to go. We have about 15 minutes before, and we've got so much to wrap. Rick, we could talk for hours on this stuff.
Yeah.
And I love what you do, because you've got so much wealth of knowledge to talk about.
Well, I could not possibly list all the occasions of newspaper articles written about giants found in mounds in North America. They are literally in the hundreds.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of them were multiple burials. One of them was quite local to me, and it was published in 1818 in the adjoining county to where I live now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very well documented for frontier era, but it was well enough documented that I could go back and check official records that, yes, the witnesses listed in the newspaper account really lived there at that time, and in fact one of them was the local constable.
Wow.
And the captain of the militia. So he was a responsible person. So to completely discount these stories as merely to sell newspapers is ludicrous, especially when you consider that the Journal of the Smithsonian Institution on several different occasions listed such accounts as part of their publication. So it's not just a fantasy, it's in the scientific literature.
Wow.
So are pygmies.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book the Homo florensis, and I've looked into these guys. Everything you've looked into, Rick, I've looked into. I think you do it a bit more in depth than I do. Mine's more like goofing off. Yours is more academic, dedicated research for a lot of dedicated reasons, I must say, Rick. But I mean, I research everything, but I'll browse through a lot, and I'm very knowledgeable. I mean, if you tell me something that you research, I'll at least know about it. I'm not a novice, but these Homo florensis guys, for those that aren't familiar, these guys were like a human hobbit type creature that lived in Indonesia. Perhaps only 3 feet tall, Rick?
3 to 4 feet tall.
Wow.
On the island of Flora, I believe it's called.
Yeah, and they died out in about 10,000 BC?
Depends on whose account you're accepting, because there are still accounts of very small people in Indonesia.
Yeah, still living today.
Yeah. And the great thing about the Homo floresiensis discovery was that they were associated with tools commensurate with the body size of these people, and evidence that they were hunting the pygmy elephants.
Wow.
With those weapons. So yeah, it's a pretty well documented thing. And even more interesting to me is there is one body of researchers who believe that there are some anatomical differences that are significant, making them a separate species, and that the most significant is the shape of the wrist bone, that they are not completely human in that regard. And yet they used tools. They had a society. They established shelter that lasted for thousands of years. Granted, it was a natural structure, but they knew to use it. And they're 3 feet tall. They'd be perfect to mine things, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Get into small little nooks and crannies, small little holes. Just get in there and do your little job and get back out again.
Yeah, and not eat much. So
unlike myself,
if you were going to enslave a race of people for something, they would be perfect for mining.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must ask. Sorry, Rick. I must ask you. What do you think about the Smithsonian Institution? Because these guys seem to get a lot of bad press over snuffing out the record of these giants, these red-haired giants that were in America. And I've had Brian Forster on the show, and he talks about these red-haired people with the cone heads in Peru as well. And there seems to be this red-haired, unusual race of people popping up all around the globe. But I think the Smithsonian in particular seem to get a lot of bad press about
Gobi Desert.
Yeah.
They were everywhere.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in the case of one of the mummies in the Gobi, 6'4", 5", pretty tall, not a giant by today's standard, but they would have been giant by standards of when that person died 3,000 years ago, or up to 14,000 years ago, depending on which report you believe. He was red-headed, and he was wearing tartar.
Wow.
Fabric. Yeah.
Wow.
So, whether that is just a ethnocentric view or whether that's real, I have yet to determine, but either way, it's an interesting bit of data.
You know,
so who mined the copper? We have one group of people that could move ships across an ocean, and we had another group of people who were diminutive and sophisticated enough to make stone tools, and they were mining copper using stone tools. But in some cases, those tools weighed 18 pounds apiece, something that you or I could not wield effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much. I guess what we have is a line of thought, a line of reasoning that nobody's addressing. Mainstream archaeology is not addressing, Rick. And I guess the thing to say is that we have anomalies, anomaly after anomaly. We have the copper, we have the red-haired giants, we have mysterious groups of people popping up left, right, and center across America. And none of these questions are addressed by mainstream academia, Rick. You probably agree on that much so far, yeah?
Yeah, they avoid them at all costs, in fact.
They avoid them at all costs. Yes, exactly. That's a very politically correct way of putting it. If not, scrub it out of the record. But yes,
and that has been done too.
Yeah.
just in the last couple of minutes, I need to talk about a conference, a couple
Sure,
of
yeah, please do, Rick, because this is something I asked you to remind me, and I'm glad you have done. This is the 12th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, Restoring the Remnant. I first came across the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith. I knew about the Mormon religion, but I never knew much about it. Like, I mean, I knew of it, but I came across it on Ancient Aliens, and it's mysterious. This has got mystery all over it. That Joseph Smith, the guy who talks about this golden book, dug it up out of the ground from a dream. Is that correct, Rick?
Yes, that's the account.
Wow, this is awesome, man. This is like off the charts, like.
Well, where it gets interesting for me, and what I will be presenting, is that Joseph Smith only made one depiction of the characters he saw in the golden plates. Mm-hmm. That is the script, what was written there, how the characters looked.
And this was found in Utah? No,
that was found in upstate New York.
Oh.
Very near the birthplace of John Wesley Powell.
Okay, but isn't there a big Mormon
yes.
in Utah?
Yeah, the center of the Mormon world basically is now in Utah.
Why is that, Rick? Why did they move to Utah? They moved to Utah.
They were persecuted out of the rest of the United States.
Oh. Wow.
by John Wesley Powell and his cohorts.
So that's why they moved to Utah and set up camp again?
Yeah.
Gotcha. And I'm going to sorry, Rick, I'm going to put a link for this in the YouTube description as well for the conference.
Cool.
Just for people to listen to. It's just so if you're listening, just follow the YouTube description for the archive show and you'll find the conference there.
Yeah, this conference is held at the Southtown Expo Center in Sandy City, Utah. Let's see, what are the dates? The 3rd and 4th, I think. 4th and 5th.
And you can watch this online as well. You can actually, if you can't make it, you can. I'm thinking about tuning in for this one, Rick. I am mad about this in terms of, I think this is something we need answers on, and I think I'm very much interested in just doing the online version for this, Rick.
And in neighboring, or almost neighboring Wyoming, on the 8th of October, I'll be at the Afton, Wyoming Civic Center. Doors open at 6:30 p.m. And the person taking care of that is one Nan Hink. So if you need directions or something, look that one up, the Afton, Wyoming Civic Center.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, can you roll out some of the evidence for Joseph Smith? Can you talk about anything?
I can talk about one thing very clearly.
Yeah.
And I claim it as my own discovery, although there's so many people contributed to my being able to do that.
Okay.
Lee Pennington being primary, I think. There is a cave in northeastern Alabama called Welsh Caves. And inscribed in the stone over, it's actually a series of caves, inscribed in the stone over one of the caves is a character that is reminiscent, certainly, of the Colburn alphabet, Colburn script of Wales, and it would be an A character inscribed over a Y character or vice versa. A very similar character appears in the only depiction that Joseph Smith ever did of the characters he saw in the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this one in Alabama is very, very old. There is another inscription, graffiti, if you will, nearby that is dated 1863, and it looks like it was carved yesterday by comparison.
Right. This is insane. I love this stuff, I love this stuff. This has got mystery all over it, This has got mystery all over it. But,
it does. There's a lot more to that particular story, but we're out of time.
Yeah. Whatever happened to the Golden Book then? Is that being disappeared from the record?
Yeah, according to the Church of Latter-day Saints, it was returned to the angel who gave it to Joseph Smith.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, but here's the thing, there's such a big following there, and there's such a big mystery over that. Was there links to the star Sirius as well, Rick?
There are certainly beliefs in that direction.
Yeah.
I haven't gone there yet. I'll perhaps investigate that sometime soon. I know there are connections in your part of the world to Sirius.
Yeah, actually, that's what I wrote about. Actually, funny enough, Rick, and that's something I've got into. Is I think Sirius pops up on the grid and all of these ancient cultures. You know, the Dogon, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, like all these ancient cultures seem to have this fixation with Sirius, and whether that was just a purely astronomical function or religious or some sort of a esoteric function, I'm not sure. You know,
I think it was all those things plus navigation.
Plus navigation too, yeah. I'm glad you brought that back in because, like you said, Rick, we've been navigating this planet for 120,000 years. You know, and at least. I mean, something we never got into as well is like I wanted to talk about, and I got to get you back, Rick, because we've had such a fascinating chat, and we could talk another different show and the stuff that we didn't talk about. But I mean,
true.
I mean, there's evidence, and I talked to a linguist about this recently, and we're almost out of time, but I can roll this out, is that the Japanese Ainu, culture have links, literal links with the, Basque, Eta group in the Basque region of Spain. These Eta, yes. The Eta people have almost a point by point analysis. A Japanese prime minister got off the plane to Spain and visited the Basque region, and it could understand the grammar of the people. Because linguistically, these guys are linked, but like, I mean, physically, there's no reason why they should have been. But here's the thing, here's the kicker. The Eta people, the Basque separatist group, Eta, and they're a separatist group because they look different, they're physically different. They got strange eyes, they've got a long aquiline nose, like a reddish coloured skin.
Very high incidence of Rh negative blood type.
Exactly, yes. I'm glad you brought the blood type in. They almost dropped out of the sky and just planted into this region, and they refuse to be, you know, they resist outside influence, like, you know, and I'm surprised they've even survived this long, you know. But,
so is Spain.
Yeah, so is Spain, exactly, you know. And they get a lot of bad press because of the terrorist group, ETA, but I mean, they are like the Atlanteans, if you ask me. This lost tribe, this Atlantean lost tribe, and I mean, it's just another remnant of this ancient transoceanic contact, you know, between ancient cultures, you know.
Well, I'll come back and we'll do a whole show about the DNA.
Oh, awesome, Rick. I would love that so much, man. I would love that so much. Rick, we're out of time. We're just gone a minute over. It's been such a pleasure you coming here. Tell us where we can get your book, Rick. I'm going to put it in the YouTube description as well, but
sure.
Just for the live listeners.
The full title is The Graves of the Golden Bear, Ancient Fortresses and Monuments of the Ohio Valley, published by Grave Distractions Publications. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Nook, iBooks, Google Books, Smashword, Diesel, half a dozen other places.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome.
And Ancient American Magazine.
Yeah, and you've been on Red Ice Radio before, and you can check out the archives there. I'm going on Red Ice myself on October 16th. Obviously everybody in the world knows about Red Ice Radio. They're a mammoth. You've been on some pretty big shows, Rick. We're going to see you on TV pretty soon as well, are we? Have you got anything coming up?
Perhaps. There's something in the works, but I'm not at liberty to talk about it.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And she garnered support, and they put up a plaque there on Mobile Bay, commemorating that spot as where Prince Madoc and however many colonists entered North America. Well, here a few years ago, that plaque was dismantled and went into storage because the historians did not agree. Well, interestingly enough, when the French were there in 1702, which is, and by the way, that is where they established the original capital of La Louisiane, was at Mobile. They initially came in to a place that they called Massacre Island, because it was like hip deep in human bones over this huge area, several acres.
Sure.
And they subsequently moved the capital further upriver into the bay, back to the early 20th century. The archaeologists were saying, you know, these graves that we find here that we call slab-sided graves, that we call stone box graves, are similar in construction, like identical, and contemporary to what is called a slab-sided grave in Wales. And there were reports of finding bodies.
I'm glad you brought this up.
Armor.
Sorry, Rick. I'm glad you brought this up because this is one of the things that I've been aware of, and I think this is fascinating, Rick. This Welsh connection to ancient America.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and of course, it was dismissed pretty much out of hand by anybody who didn't live near Louisville, and by one lady at Mobile, Alabama, where they say that Prince Matic came ashore, and she was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution because of hurricanes and whatnot. But while there, they recorded an event where the younger brother of the governor had coerced, basically, one of the local Mobile Indians to take him out to a place that's called, on that map, that 1716 Delisle map, it's still called the Isle of Statues. And D'Iberville recorded that there were 5 statues on this mound, and that it was a man, a woman, a baby, an owl, and a bear. And he did not believe that they could possibly have been made by the local talent. And he was going to send them back to France. Well, there's no record of them ever getting to France or existing anywhere at this point in time. But they were yellowish in color, so they were kind of gold.
We are talking to Rick Osman about ancient America and the fortified structures there and his book. So, Rick, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you. When we left off, I believe we were talking about King Arthur.
Sure.
And his having been killed in North America. And again, this is Alan Wilson, Baron Blackett's interpretation of chronicles that still exist in Wales. And in the original script as it existed in Wales in that time period, which is roughly 570 AD. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was also described, in 48 BC by Julius Caesar. So anyway, they had their own script, and it was distinct from any of the other scripts. Caesar, who was very adept, did not know this script. At any rate, you find this script along the Ohio Valley in a couple of different places. And the local legends have been that Prince Matic founded his colony there. And that fortress at Devil's Backbone was a big part of it. Well, interestingly enough, archaeologically, there may be some agreement even amongst some of the now past archaeologists. If you go